It's almost a brand new growing season, a time for new life, new plants, and new possibilities. In many ways, it often feels like a new year at this time of spring, a clean slate, a chance for new possibilities. It is new possibilities that I wish to speak with you about today, starting with a 20th century academic named Alfred North Whitehead. Whitehead was a notable mathematician, logician, educator, and philosopher. The staggering complexity of Whitehead's thought, coupled with the extraordinary literary quality of his writing, have conspired to make Whitehead, in an oft repeated saying, one of the most quoted but least read philosophers in the Western canon. While he is widely recognized for his collaborative work with Bertrand Russell on the Principia Mathematica, he also made highly innovative contributions to philosophy, especially in the area of process metaphysics. Whitehead's decades long focus on the logical and algebraic issues of space and geometry led to his work on extension, which is an integral part of an explosion of profoundly original philosophical work. Facing mandatory retirement at the age of 65 in England, Whitehead accepted an invitation and position from Harvard in 1924, where he continued his philosophical output. His Science in the Modern World offers a careful critique of orthodox scientific materialism and presents his first worked out version of the related fallacies of misplaced concreteness and simple location. The first fallacy is the error of treating an abstraction as though it were really concretely real. The second is the error of assuming that anything that is real must have a simple spatial location. But the pinnacle of Whitehead's metaphysical work came with his monumental book, Process and Reality in 1929, followed by his Adventures of Ideas in 1933. The first of these books gives a comprehensive and multi-layered categorical system of internal and external relations that analyzes the logic of becoming an extension within the context of a solution to the problem of the one and the many, while also providing a ground for his philosophy of nature. The second is an outline of philosophy of history and culture within the framework of his own metaphysical scheme. Whitehead brought to us an interdisciplinary concept called process philosophy, which is often now regarded as more than just a philosophy, but also a theology. Process theology is very dense and complicated, so much so that outside of the academy, it is hardly discussed, because to do so takes years of contextual study. Part of the challenge of bringing a subject like process theology to the public, particularly as a parish minister, to a congregation, is that the ideas behind and through process theology are so large that they defy reduction into a 15 to 20-minute sermon. I tell you this because I am no more amazing than anyone else, and I'm going to try to express some of the core ideas of process theology today, and I will not do a complete job of it. How many of you have seen the movie called Hidden Figures? Came out about 4 years ago. Whether or not you've seen it, there's a scene where Dr. Catherine Goebel Johnson is doing some calculations on this large blackboard. And I'm sure that there, to many who are not me, some of what she was doing made sense. I recognized some of the symbols. I understood about balancing equations. But after that, well, it was all a mystery to me. For the movie to explain all that math to me, sitting as I was in the audience in the theater, would have made the movie hours longer than it needed to be or should be. So here's what they did. They let her write all over that chalkboard. And then when she found the answer, she circled it. And that let the non-math people like me, know that it was all good, that she'd figured it all out. I didn't have to worry anymore. And I was grateful. That circling is a partial summation of all of the many years of training and her own natural genius, laid out simply for me. It was a snapshot of the process. What I'm bringing you is a snapshot this morning of process theology. If you want to know more about it, and a few of you well might, I'm very happy to direct you to the things that can be read by you, but nobody on a Sunday morning deserves to be dragged through some of what seminarians had to read. One small example, the 28-page essay that comes with a 48-page glossary of terms to explain the 28-page essay. Whitehead believed that God is mutable, movable, a force of creation, yes, but not the sole force of creation. He believed in the human will and the actions that will expresses as a co-creative force with God, as a pair working together to create the universe. I chose this image for a couple reasons. I couldn't find any really cool image of knitting needles mid-stitch. I couldn't find an image of a racially diverse group of people knitting together, and I was unwilling to share an image of a pretty white girl knitting because that image would have been counter to the kind of world I'm trying to co-create with the divine. Would have been expected, and this faith is often about the unexpected. I chose knitting needles because to me, it can be a symbol of process theology. Whatever your definition of the power that is larger than you in the universe, maybe God, maybe nature, maybe the collective force of humanity, the flying spaghetti monster, whatever that images or definition are, for this morning, please visualize them as a knitting needle. Have you done that? Okay, good. Now you are the other needle that is required to make even the simplest of stitches. This is how it works. There is knitting needle A, and there is knitting needle B. God and you, and the two needles must interact in a dance that to some seems ordinary, and to others, like me, seems frankly magical, in order to create a stitch. In this allegory, time is the yarn. The two needles dance with the yarn, and a stitch happens. Life is then a series of stitches. The process theologian will tell you that each stitch is a moment in time, and that once a moment in time is past, it is forever in the past. It is forever what you and God made of it, and once it is in the past, it is immutable. But they will also tell you not to despair, because the only thing that limits the possibilities of that very moment you and God are busily co-creating, the only thing that limits the possibilities of this moment is how wide your life experience has been leading up to this moment. Imagine with me an hourglass. You see how the middle of this is just really narrow, a small passageway where a few grains of sand slips through? How the top and the bottom of the hourglass are far wider than the center where the sand falls through? In process theology, unbound by the mathematics of how many grains of sand fall in an hour, the wider your life experience, the more potential each moment in your past has as you co-create it with God. Once created, unlike knitting, that moment cannot be unstitched, at least not with current technology. I want to go back to the image of the guys knitting together again. Here is how my process worked. In the story, the internet is God. I went to worship at the temple of God, my laptop, and to ask for an image that I could use to teach, to tease, really, you all about this morning's sermon on process theology. I opened up mighty Google and did an image for knitting needles. I was hoping, as I stated earlier, to find an image of people of color knitting together. And what I found was a bunch of images of needles, utterly void of human hands or scarf that was in the process of being knitted. So I went back to Google and I adjusted my search. Knitting. I got a lot of fashion photos of people wearing knitted items. It wasn't really what I was looking for. Then I decided to get direct with Google. Multicultural hands knitting. Eventually, I found this image of the knitting dudes. This is one example of how process theology works. In my experience of life, the tools I brought with me into the moment of inquiry, my moment of searching for the known universe, my knowledge that I wanted to find an image that would be remarkable, that would be beautiful, that would give a visual indication of the kind of world I wanted to see. I wanted an image that would demonstrate quietly and yet strongly that we are a church that welcomes people of color. I wanted a more sophisticated message, a more subtle way of saying, hey, we see and value all people here than just some sign. I also wanted an image of knitting because I was already thinking about God as knitting needle, not just because it's kind of funny, but also because I think it's a good, solid image that might stick with people. Imagery, of course, is a very useful tool for teaching. So I sat in my office and I prayed, or I Googled. Use the verb you're more comfortable with. I put my fingers to the keyboard and I requested some benevolence. I was knitting needle B and I approached knitting needle A and we engaged in a dance. I wasn't expecting an image of four dudes knitting together in what at first glance I took to be a Navy ship because of the color of the walls. The walls, if you couldn't tell in the picture, are a very pale gray. But then I noticed the hand tattoo on the one guy and the goatee on another. And I realized this couldn't be a Navy ship, though all the guys were young enough to be in the Navy together. This was a photo from inside an institution. The photo was from Pinterest. And at the risk of offending some, Pinterest is a site I don't really like. I can never find the context behind the images, only the images there, and so I have no way of knowing the story of the four young men knitting together in an institutional setting. See, I'd gone looking for one thing, and I'd found something completely different, a different story that I hadn't expected. I discovered a story about how a retired car salesperson named Lynn Swirling took her love of knitting into a prison in Maryland and has taught more than 100 men to knit. Knitting has had a real effect on the men in the institution itself. The men have learned how to knit what are called comfort dolls, which are given to children who are removed from their homes due to domestic issues there. And they also knit hats and mittens for children in inner city schools. I had gone to the divine. I'd asked to engage in a dance, and the resulting story was completely unexpected. This is the best way that I can describe process theology to you. In part because of time constraints, in part because frankly process theology can be so complex that I don't understand all of its nuances. Earlier, you heard a poem from Billy Collins called Absence. In the poem, Billy paints for us a world in which he finds a single chess piece, and he imagines three worlds from this random finding. He imagines a world in which he finds the chess piece. He imagines that the owners of the chess set have improvised a way to keep playing chess without the white knight by using a salt shaker. And he imagines that all the other chess pieces are made nervous by this, and they long for the return of their original family member. He imagines that the white knight in his hand longs to be made useful again. Billy Collins could have easily walked by that chess piece without noticing it, or he could have noticed it but not noted it. He may have even picked it up and committed the greatest sin possible. He could have not wondered about it at all. Instead, Mr. Collins took the sum of his wide life experiences and engaged with the chess piece and the great mystery of life, and he wondered at the possibilities. Mr. Collins, the chess piece, and the divine engage in a dance, and that poem is its result of the dance. The poem is the moment of potential, completed and now forever fixed. In our lives, we have countless moments, literally countless. Each of them is bursting with potential. And yet, as Hina Hashimi teaches us, an individual can't do anything itself. All of our dreams come true with the cooperation and co-creation of other souls. It is in the interaction with the other souls that all beautiful things come to fruition. This interaction need not be born of supplication. That is not required of us, as it is in some other faiths. Each interaction ought to be sought with humility, because the boastful don't learn. The boastful believe that they are alone are enough, that they have all the answers they need. The boastful are as one knitting needle alone, pointed but missing the point. As we leave our time together, I hope that you can keep the image of the knitting needles working together in cooperation in your mind as you go about your week, knowing that all of our dreams come true with the cooperation and co-creation of other souls, if they're ever going to come true at all. Amen. Blessed be. Ashe. Be well.